and welcome to Sussex Street Christian Centre's reflection series on the Gospel of Mark. We hope that you are blessed by them as they aid you in your growth and depth of relationship with God, as well as inspire you to action in His kingdom. Today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 12 verses 41 to 44, and I'm going to be reading from the N.I.V. The Widow's Offering. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." This is a real-life demonstration of what Jesus had just taught the disciples in regard to the scribes. The incident illustrates the contrast between 2 different approaches to service to God. There is a hypocritical, shallow approach and a true spiritual devotion. Mark tells us that Jesus is sitting opposite the place in the temple courts where offerings, donations or alms were made or given. Whilst sitting there, he observed all manners of people approaching the booths to make their offerings. We're told many rich people threw in large amounts. Now, one little fact to understand here is that the booths must have been in the women's court, because we're told of men and women are together. If it were in the men's area, it would have been a different story, because women were not allowed in the men's court. Giving gifts to God was an established practice in that day, which can be tracked back and attributed to gifts given to the sanctuary in the days and weeks after God brought the people out of Egypt. In Exodus 25 verses 1 to 8, he commanded the people to bring gifts to be used in the construction of the tabernacle, the very first sanctuary. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, that they may bring..." Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, that they bring me an offering. From everyone who gives it willingly, with his heart you shall take my offering. And this is the offering which you shall take from them: gold, silver and bronze, blue, purple and scarlet thread, fine linen and goat's hair, ram skins dyed red, badger skins and acacia wood, oil for the light and spices for the anointed oil, and for the sweet incense, onyx stones and stones to be set in the ephod and in the breastplate. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." Later in Deuteronomy chapter 14 verses 22 to 29, as Israel had become an agrarian society, God instituted the practice of tithing. "Be sure to set aside 1/10 of all that your fields produce each year. Eat the tithe of your grain, new wine and olive oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name, so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always. But if that place is too distant and you have been blessed by the Lord your God and cannot carry your tithe, because the place where the Lord will choose to put his name is so far away, then exchange your tithe for silver, and take the silver with you and go to the place the Lord your God will choose. Use the silver to buy whatever you like: cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, or anything you wish. Then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice. And do not neglect the Levites living in your towns, for they have no allotment or inheritance of their own. At the end of every 3 years, bring all the tithes of that year produce and store it in your towns, so that the Levites, who have no allotment or inheritance of their own, and the foreigners, the fatherless and the widows who live in your towns may come and eat and be satisfied, and so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands." God ordained these gifts to be given to support the priests and the Levites. The gifts could be used, which they often were, to help the foreigners, the orphans and widows. You just look at Deuteronomy 26:12. Now in Jesus' time, donations were brought to the temple, as this was essentially the national bank. The person who administered and decided how the national bank distributed its funds was considered one of the most important officials in Israel. Jesus was witnessing many wealthy people making very large donations. However, he wasn't happy. He was almost disgusted at the discrepancy, and one particular person broke his heart. He also saw a donation of a different kind. A poor widow came and threw in 2 mites. Now, this is considered the most famous donation in history. This one donation illustrates something incredibly important in God's economy. Number one, this donation is better known than all the donations given by Bill Gates, the millions and millions of pounds donated or dollars donated by the Carnegies or the Rockefeller family. The most famous gift was made by this poor widow in the temple as Jesus looked on. And what makes the widow's gift especially amazing is that it stands in stark contrast to the manner of the scribes and the rich. They wanted people to see their godliness and their virtue. A contrast between wanting to be seen and not wanting to be seen. I am sure seeing all the big donations must have made the woman feel ashamed of her meagre offering. Her 2 mites were equivalent to 1/32 of a denarius, and a denarius was the wage for 1 day's work. Despite her not wanting to be noticed, I am sure Jesus watched her like a hawk. And I'm sure Jesus watched the person in the booth receiving the money like a hawk to see his reaction. Now, noticing the woman's offering, he calls his disciples to come close. And he makes this the example of what he had previously said about the scribes. Jesus, unable to resist through outrage, pointed out the contrast to his disciples. The wealthy were giving out of their abundance. They gave to God what they could spare. But the widow had nothing to spare and gave all that she had. There was no sacrifice involved at all for the majority of people. There was no cost to them in terms of their substance. However, for the poor woman, it was a very costly sacrifice. Despite it only being a mere 2 mites, Jesus, having observed her sacrifice, says to his disciples that the widow had put in more than anyone else. Jesus was speaking and teaching his disciples, and even speaking and teaching us today, not of God's fiscal dealings or how God balances his books. God measures a gift by another standard. It was not the money that Jesus valued most. Rather, he valued her heart, the act of piety by her devotion, her complete love for God, and her desire and wish to obey him and honour him. This form of sacrificial devotion is what we as believers are called to. And after all, our Lord sacrificed his all for me and for you, his people. He therefore calls us to give of ourselves, and when doing so, do it quietly. Matthew 6 verses 1-4 say, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honoured by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." God is not so much concerned with what we give, he is far more concerned in how we give. We must fight against the desire to be recognized by man. This can be applied in many things, not just the giving of money. What about highlighting a good work of service? God honors a silent server who doesn't seek recognition, but the heart of the person who works out of devotion to see God glorified and God glorified alone. God sees all that we give, money, time, and effort. He rewards those who give from hearts of devotion to Him.